Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast. And joining me is NBA draft expert Corey Tulaba from the Draftdaq NBA Draft podcast with Albert Gim. Great to have you with us, Corey. And I know you're doing more than just the podcast, right?
Yeah, it's a crazy time. This has been a really cool year. I've been covering the draft for a few years now, but at the beginning of this draft cycle, I teamed up with a number of draft analysts to start the No Ceilings NBA team. So we come together, we put out a daily newsletter where at noceilingsnba.com, where if you subscribe, it's free. It gets delivered directly to your inbox Monday through Friday. Sometimes we post multiple times a day. We're really active now. We have a YouTube channel, No Ceilings TV. We also have the No Ceilings podcast. So we're really just trying to honestly take over the entire draft space and cover it in a really unique way that we feel like has never been done before. So it's an exciting time. We just released our official 2022 NBA Draft Guide, which is our top 58 prospects with in-depth player breakdowns, statistics, player chemistry, which is like our kind of fun way of doing player comps. So real exciting time. And we've just been hammering the draft world hard.
That sounds great, and the Rockets fans will appreciate that because I feel like it's just about more time that we've spent on the draft in the last couple of years than the previous, 15 or 20 years of the last bit of Rockets history. And we'll get to the Rockets pick at the 3 spot to start off with, and it feels like they're destined for Paolo, Corey, and I give it feels like to me an 80% chance Paolo is the one of the big 3 between Jabari, Chet, and Paolo that's left on the board. You agree that Paolo is the odds-on favorite at this point?
Yeah, if I was a betting man, I would say that Paolo is the guy. But as you said, I think 80% that you said is probably a pretty good number because there is certainly an outside chance that, it could be a wild card going with Jaden Ivey. I've had a front office executive tell me like there's a chance that he thinks that if somebody slides, it could be Paolo. And that's like to that 4th spot, maybe even out of the top 4. So, but I would say that Paolo is probably the favorite because I think Chet and Jabari are going to go 1 and 2.
For a lot of Rockets fans, frankly, there's a general lack of enthusiasm for Paolo for a couple of reasons. The Rockets front court badly deficient in 3 areas, I would say: long distance shooting, defense, and rebounding. Most feel he's mediocre to below average in all 3 areas, shooting and defense especially. It's not to say he can't make up for these things with some major strides, potentially become above average in all those areas down the road. But I'll speak for myself when I say you hate that you can't make that major jump this coming season. And without a major defensive and shooting influx, especially in the front court where you need it, it means another ugly year of losing basketball. How do you feel about Paolo? Where are you on the spectrum, and how he fits in with the Rockets as well?
He's my number 2 prospect on my board, but I've definitely had a weird relationship with that ranking throughout the season. I saw him live twice this year, at the beginning of the season at the Champions Classic where they played Kentucky. And then I saw him again towards the end of the season in the ACC tournament when they played Miami. And I think that he is, by all accounts, like he should be the number 1 prospect. Because when you look at him, 6'10", 250, can handle the ball like a guard, can make plays for his teammates, and he can really score at all 3 levels. And then defensively, when he's locked in, he's as good as anybody because he swallows smaller guys up because he could stay with them laterally, and then he's big enough to come over and help and swat shots from the weak side and whatnot. But there is this weird thing with him where you wonder if there's like a little Ben Simmons in him, where it's like, is his number 1 priority becoming the best basketball player that he could possibly be? With that said, he's just like undeniably talented. I think the shot is fine. Like I don't think it's a weakness of his necessarily. I think that his shot is respectable enough that you have to play out. If you go under, he will punish you. He's good in the pick and pop. And I think one of the things for me is that, I look at him more as like a jumbo wing than like a big man necessarily. So I think he fits where the modern NBA is currently, but is also really headed, where you have all of these guys who are multi-tooled, can switch up and down a lineup, and can do a whole bunch of things with the ball in their hands. And he could do all of that. So to me, like, even if he's available and that's the pick, I think it's a major win. Now, it's not the cleanest fit in the front court. I don't think him and Şengün are, you know, a long-term pairing. And I'm like a huge Şengün guy. I had him 5th on my board last year. So I love Şengün, but Paolo Banchero is a better long-term prospect. So if Şengün, who I'm sure is beloved by the Rockets community, happens to be a guy that, you know, I think he would bring back value. And if that means that you know, send him off for somebody who fits the team a little bit better, I think that is not the worst thing in the world. Because I think right now, if you're the Rockets, while continuity is good, you're still searching for who are your building blocks going to be. I think for me, Jalen Green is probably the only one I would say is like the guy who I would, you know, 5 years down the line, he's the one who I'd be like, he's definitely here. I can't say that about, you know, a ton of other guys on the Rockets, although they have nice pieces. But I think Paolo would be another one of those guys. And you add him to Jalen Green, and it's a pretty dynamic 1-2 punch. So to me, I think it's a pretty good outcome, but it doesn't come without its risks.
Are you like me? Do you feel like, well, this is not going to allow the Rockets to make a huge jump because, you know, you bring in a Jabari or you bring in a Chet, and all of a sudden you've got somebody that can provide real defense next to Şengün, and that's really what they're lacking. The defense in the front court, it's just a major problem. And, you know, it's going to take Paolo a while to get that 3-point shot to where he's going to scare people. Whereas, you know, obviously we know what Jabari can do. And then with Chet, you know, defensively, I think, you know, maybe this is a stretch, but I feel like he could be sort of in that Evan Mobley type big guy that can, you know, help you guard multiple positions potentially and make up for a lot of things defensively. And I just always felt like he complements Şengün more than the other two guys that, you know, everybody's talking about at the top of the draft.
I mean, I'm in 100% agreement with you. I've written about how I want Houston to walk away with Chet from the draft because I feel the exact same way. When you look at Chet and Şengün in the front court, it's very much like Drew Timme and Chet at Gonzaga, but Şengün I think is a much better talent than Timme, obviously, who, you know, is going back because he's not a guy who's really got like a big time NBA future. But the fact that Chet can space out, let Şengün work inside, and vice versa, there's enough space there that, you know, you can run some weird like 4-5 pick and rolls between them that I think could be interesting. I think they're both good passers, and Chet's a knockdown shooter as well. And then defensively, you know, I'm with you. You know, you mentioned Evan Mobley. To me, he's like Chet is a better shot blocking prospect than Mobley is at the same age. I think Mobley's a more fluid mover on the perimeter, but Chet's no slouch himself. So I think that with Chet, you know, it's about scheme versatility, right? Like, he's not a guy that's going to get played off the floor in the playoffs. He can guard out on an island as well as anybody who's that size can. He could play in a drop. You could ice ball screens. You know, he's good at that cat and mouse game. Like, you could do all of these. He could come up to the level of the screen and recover back because he's got, you know, just crazy length. So he is that like number one option defensively. And that's the people who I think are Chet skeptics. You know, they look at a guy like Jabari who just shoots the heck out of the ball, and Paolo, who are like these monstrous, like potentially scoring threats. And while Chet definitely has stuff in his bag that he didn't get to show at Gonzaga, I look and say, I know that Chet's a number one option defensively, while still potentially being like, if he tops out as a number 3 option on offense, but he's a number 1 option defensive player of the year, all defense guy year in and year out, like, that's very much worthy of that top pick. So I think that, I mean, look, there's some smoke that Chet is a guy who could drop too. You know, Presti keeps things, you know, very tight-lipped in his organization. He's not afraid to buck consensus. And, you know, with Orlando, if Jabari really is their guy, you could be looking at a situation where the Rockets actually have the choice between Chet Holmgren and Paolo Banchero. So I do think that there are some interesting scenarios where even Chet could be available to the Rockets.
Right. And the thing with if Paolo's there, if he's the one that's there at the 3 spot, I just can't imagine any other scenario. Is there any other guy that you could imagine the Rockets would be willing to take? What do you think about Ivy or Shaden Sharp and some of those guys? Because, you know, some people think, well, you take the best player and maybe one of those two guys is the best player between between Paolo and those two.
Yeah. If the Rockets went Ivy, I wouldn't like hate it by any means. I think Ivy's really, really dynamic. I've even flirted with having him at 2 on my board at one point. You know, I think he's more like Zach LaVine than Ja Morant. I know he looks like Ja stylistically sometimes, but I think his play style is a little more Zach LaVine-esque with his athleticism. He's a score first guy. His playmaking he's a solid playmaker, but it's not like his first instinct by any means. But he is really dynamic athletically, and putting Jalen and Ivy in the backcourt. And then obviously like you have Porter Jr. and you have Josh Christopher, who are also pretty terrific athletes. I mean, it's a really dynamic backcourt athletically. Obviously, if you're going Ivy, you're probably ideally moving on from some of those guys, shuffling them around, maybe finding better fits. But Ivy and Jalen Green is like pretty tenacious on the offensive side of the ball and out in transition. And what I like about Ivy is that a lot of people think that he needs to have the ball in his hands to thrive at the next level. And while I do think that that's the thing that will like push him into that like potentially like high level all NBA tier that he has potentially inside of him, he's a guy who can play off ball. He spent a lot of time off ball at Purdue this year. Like Purdue was a team that had Trevion Williams and Zach Edey, two, you know, really big guys who offered different skill sets. And Trevion Williams was a little bit more modern NBA from the fact that, you know, he was a really good passer and he played out of handoffs a lot. So, you know, Jaden Ivey would do a lot of that, like coming off from the weak side and come off handoffs and use that as a way to get downhill and attack. Or, you know, if they cheat under to meet him at the spot, he's like stepping back and popping from 3. They even used him running off like pin downs and floppy actions and stuff. So while he isn't like this prototypical guy that you look at and go, oh, he's like the guy that you could put next to Jalen Green off ball, he's certainly capable of it. And when you have a guy like Alperen Şengün, who, again, he's a little bit like Trevion Williams in that, you know, he's such a good playmaker at his position that you could do so much interesting things on offense that I think that it would work. So if that was the pick, I wouldn't be like upset about it, because he has the potential to be one of the most impactful guys in this draft. Again, like I think Chet's going to be the most impactful guy, but you know, who knows, maybe people are right. And he does break down physically. Right. And that opens up the door for Jaden Ivey to be the guy. Shaden Sharp, I would be surprised if that was the guy, because I just think there's so much that teams don't know about him, especially with COVID. Like teams just really haven't seen him in person outside of like, you know, if they get him in for a workout or his combine pro day. And he's not a guy who's like long been on NBA radars. He's a guy who basically went into the EYBL his last season there and just kind of shot himself up from this unranked guy to the number 1 prospect in the class. He's ridiculously talented, smooth as anything, and he can get his shot off and it's a smooth shot. He's crazy athletic himself, like powerful leaper, agile, great body control, but he's ways away. He just doesn't have a lot of high level competition under his belt. So when you look at, you know, like Jalen, like, you know, he struggled to adjust to the speed of the game at the beginning of the season, and it took him a little bit. And then like after the All-Star break, he hit the ground running, and, you know, you saw the vision with him. And Jalen spent the year playing against pros in the G League. Anthony Edwards the year before, you know, he spent his college season playing high level D1 competition. And then he had a similar trajectory with Jalen, where like he struggled at the beginning of the year learning the speed and the nuance. And then he came on after the All-Star break. Shaden Sharp hasn't even played organized basketball in over a year. And before that, it was like EYBL, like some high school stuff. Like he doesn't have that high level competition. So I think it's going to take him even longer. So if he was the guy, it's a fine upside play, because when you look at his frame, his athleticism, his shot making ability, it's all there for him to be an absolute superstar player. It's just, you have to have patience, because this is a kid who, as talented as he is, as natural as it all looks, he's still raw. He's still got to learn. Like he's nowhere close to being a playmaker. He's very much a one pass away guy. And with the speed of the NBA game, it's going to take some adjustment. So with him, it's all about patience. But I would be shocked if he was the pick. But if it was Ivy, I would be less shocked.
Yeah, and maybe the fit's better with Ivy, because a lot of people here just are not convinced Kevin Porter Jr. is a point guard.
Right.
You move him to the 3, you put Ivy at the point guard. Maybe that works a little bit better. But I keep saying it. Size matters in the NBA when you got a chance to draft somebody with the size of Paolo. And I'm just curious, because I don't think I asked you about this, but do you have a comp for Paolo? Is there somebody that he reminds you of that's already in the NBA?
A popular one, and it's definitely one I've brought up in the past, is like Detroit Blake Griffin. Like still athletic, but like multi-tooled, a good enough shooter that, you don't really want to leave him open, but he could pass and play make. I think he's a little bit more like wingy than Blake was. Blake was, pretty much like a 4 at that point. I think like you could see him initiating sets with the ball in his hands a little bit more. At the beginning of the year, I kind of set like a Derek Coleman, which was, a little throwback, where like just supremely talented, can do it all. Hopefully he puts it together. This one, it takes some imagination, but like, what if you pictured LeBron at like 41 years old, where, like not quite what he is now, but still just able to use that powerful big frame, and like a smart, high IQ guy who can make plays, and like not the best shooter in the world, but he's going to knock down timely shots. So he's like in that mold of these big wing initiator playmaker type guys. And I think like Tatum's not a very good comp for him, but I think like if you're betting on Paolo, I feel like that's kind of the role that you see him in down the line in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of too. And let's move to the 17th pick, because most Rockets fans, and I'll include myself in this group, would love to move up a few spots. It feels like the draft drops off a little bit right before that 17th spot. For myself and some of the Rockets fans, wing defense would be ideal. For instance, Jeremy Sohan or Tari East. And these drafts never play out like you think, but the group right now is, the group think is that those two guys are going to be gone. So what do you think, and who do you like for the Rockets if they do sit at that spot?
This is a really weird draft, and depending on who you talk to, I bet you get a different answer as to who they think would be available. Because I think once you get past like probably like 9 or 10 in this draft, it kind of flattens to a point where everybody's kind of close together in talent. And it wouldn't shock me if, there were guys who you weren't expecting who all of a sudden were lottery guys. And some of the guys we've been following all year thinking you're going to be lottery are available at the Rockets pick. Out of Sohan and Eason, I actually think Eason is a guy who may be available there, just from some of the intel I've heard behind the scenes. Like Sohan, I think, is going to go top 10. I think one of the major differences between the two is that he's just so much younger than Eason is right now. Like Eason's a guy who, even though he's a sophomore, he's going to be 21, or he is 21. He's going to be 22 probably when the NBA season starts, where Sohan is like a very young 18. So I think Sohan goes a little earlier. Eason, I could see it. Outside of that, like I'm a big Ochai Agbaji guy, and he's another guy that I could see going in like the 14, 15 range. But if you're in that range at 17, you have a shot at getting a guy like that too. Because to me, while he's another guy who's a little bit older, he just is a guy who consistently wins. He's coming off a national title. He's won over 100 games in his college career. And he very much represents to me like what you want out of modern wings. defends multiple positions, strong, athletic, can shoot it in a variety of ways, keeps getting better, and he's a winner. And to me, one of the things that, I ask a lot of people is like, do you think winning is a skill? Because there are certain players that just come in and they bring that kind of like winning aspect to them and help build their team's culture. And you see these guys every year who help their teams win a lot of games in college or win national championships. They get a little underrated come draft time. Davion Mitchell last year got a little underrated come draft time. I think he went properly in the draft itself, but on, the discourse about him, Mikal Bridges in his draft, even Jalen Brunson, a lot of Cam Johnson, people complained that he went too early. And I think Agbaji is a guy like that, where like, if you get him at 17, he's a guy that you could picture playing off of Jalen Green pretty easily and playing next to him, because he doesn't need to do a lot of creating, but he does a lot of the little things next to him that are really valuable. Other guys I like in that range, I really like Dalen Terry from Arizona. He's kind of a guy that is freshly on the radar, mostly because we didn't know if he was going to be in the draft this year or last year. And he's a guy, Arizona, 6'7", 7-foot wingspan, and he was coming off the bench a lot of the year, playing behind Kirk Krisha, and he went down, and then Terry took over, and it was like just a rocket to the moon. Like, you saw what this kid looks like, the vision. Like, he's one of the best passers in the entire draft. The way that he hits guys in stride on cuts and out in transition, it's really beautiful to watch. There's like an element of Tyrese Halliburton to him. Like, I'm not saying he's that level of prospect, because he's not that level of shooter. He shot it like 36, 37%, shot it in like the 40s in the tournament, but low volume on that. The shot looks a little funky, so I'm not projecting him to be like this plus shooter right away, but he's got the size, the length, and the versatility to like impact playoff games down the line. When you look at guys like Derek White in Boston, those big kind of connecting pieces. You saw what Lonzo Ball did for the Bulls this year when he was healthy. These guys who are plus size, can play make, and then are capable of hitting shots off the ball, and then playing defense. Like, those guys are really valuable. I think he'd be an interesting fit in Houston as a bet to kind of handle some of like the playmaking duties. And for similar reasons, I think Jalen Williams from Santa Clara would be a really interesting bet as well.
I was going to ask you about him, because
yeah.
I heard you guys talking about him, and you were right in my head, because I've kind of fallen in love with him the more I've watched some of the video of him over the last few weeks. And I mean, the thing that amazes me is how far down he is on a lot of the mocks. And when I watch him, I'm like, well, there's a little bit of Jalen Green's athleticism. I mean, I watched him, of course, in that Gonzaga game when they beat Chet, and I was just, who is this guy? And the thing that I didn't maybe see as much in that game, but when I start watching the video of him, what a passer he is. I mean, he's such a great passer, creative, way better than Jalen Green. And he's a little bit taller than Jalen, and he's got a lot bigger wingspan, so much more potential defensively. I mean, I don't know. I'll let you go from here, but I just love him.
No, and you have every reason to. He's a guy that he's been on like the no ceilings radar for a while. But he, as you said, he's been ranked really low throughout most of the process. And it's because, he played up at Santa Clara when, most people, at least where I'm from on the East Coast, like nobody's staying up to watch Santa Clara games. Like, people are barely staying up to watch Chet play, let alone some kid from, a small college that, isn't going to go play in the tournament. But yeah, 6'5", 6'6", 7'2.5" wingspan, late riser, late bloomer. Like, he was 5'10" in high school. Like, if this kid was 6'4" in high school, he wouldn't be going to Santa Clara. He'd be going to a blue blood, but he had a late growth spurt. But because of that, he developed all of this craft, because he still had like really big feet and a long wingspan. So he was like an awkward kid who had to grow into his body. But once he did that, like, he's taken off, and he shoots it off the bounce, shoots it off the catch. And like you said, the playmaking is what gets you, because to me, he's the best pick and roll player in the draft. Like, the pace, the poise, he gets guys on his hip. He knows where to find guys at all times. He makes some of the best passes in this entire draft. I mean, I can give multiple examples, but without film, it wouldn't be doing it justice. Like, he's just so good in that regard. And he's another one of these guys who plays multiple positions. And that's what, when you look at the modern NBA, when you look at these teams who are having success in the playoffs, it's because they have a bunch of guys who just play multiple positions, and it almost makes positions irrelevant. So he's a sleeper guy who I think would be just an excellent fit, and you could see him eventually being like the elite initiator. It's funny because one of my early comps for him was Kevin Porter Jr., just a right-handed version, and maybe with, you know, a little bit of a cooler head. He's a guy who never gets too high, never too low, just always kind of, you know, straight down the middle. But there's also a little bit of like SGA in him, like the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander OKC, kind of smooth, crafty, takes his time, gets to his spots. It looks effortless, you know. So I think, you know, Shai and Kevin Porter Jr. are a little more like bursty with their first step, but there's a lot of similarity with those guys. But you know, he's got the size and the wingspan that you start getting these thoughts like he can probably guard 1 through 4 with a nearly 7'3" wingspan, you know. And he competes. So just a high IQ. I'm a huge fan. I think he's like going to be the steal of the draft if a team can get him. You know, the later in the draft he goes, it's like this kid's going to be a stud.
Absolutely. I definitely can see it. Just a couple other names I'll throw out at you because I know they're projected to be later in the first round, so potentially there for the Rockets. Any thoughts on Nikola Jovic, Jaden Hardy?
Yeah. So Hardy, I like more than Jovic. I actually saw Hardy. It's probably his worst game of his entire career. He was 0 for 11, and you know, it was just like, it was one of those games where you're like, you can't really take anything from this because it's so bad that it's like, it's so abnormal that the only thing you want to see live is like how he responds. Does he keep trying to get his shots? Does he become tentative? But you know, he was somebody I was super high on coming into the year. Like I just, the potential he has as a shot maker, it's pretty impressive. Now I've kind of, you know, after watching him for a year against high level competition, I see him more as a Buddy Hield instead of like a Bradley Beal, someone who I think is going to be really impressive, just running off a million screens and getting himself in open from pin downs and floppy and cuts. And but the one thing about him is that he really improved throughout the year. So like he started out really struggling with the speed of the game. And again, he was, you know, he made a jump to play against pros. So that's completely normal. And unlike Jalen Green, like who played in the bubble in Orlando during his season, you know, he was playing in more, you know, normal setting. So he struggled, but he made huge strides as a playmaker, as a ball handler, and just his overall IQ. So I see him as a guy that like at 17, like that's good value for him if you take him there, because he is a guy that can really light up a gym. I had a scout tell me they were at his pro day and he knocked down like 33 of 35 like Steph Curry range threes that he shot. And you don't want to take too much from those workouts, but it does show the type of range that he has when he's knocking them down so effortlessly. And that's what he was known for coming into the year. Jovic, I'm a little bit less high on. I've kind of, the thing is with him, for all his intriguing tools at 6'11" in shoes, I just don't know who he's going to guard, because, you know, in the league that he played in, which doesn't have anywhere near the athletes of the NBA, you know, he really struggled guarding out on an island. He's not strong enough or physical enough to really bang down low. And he's a guy who's going to have to play some 4 and maybe even some 5 at his height. So I'm really nervous about just what's going to happen when teams see him and just go, all right, switch. Let's run him through the screens and get him on an island, and what that does to your defense and how long he's going to be able to stay on a floor before his coach goes, all right, we can't do this anymore. Like we're getting murdered here. Offensively, I think, you know, he's got some really interesting passing chops, and his IQ, he's got a high IQ as a passer. He's got good vision, plays with good pace. But I wonder how good he's going to be on ball, that a coach is going to actually give him those reps to, you know, kind of use his passing as a plus, because as a shot maker, he's really inconsistent. It's not like he has the purest stroke. Like he's a good shooter, but he's not a great shooter by any stretch. And, he hits a lot of like impressive step backs and, side steps and stuff like that. But to me, it's a little bit of what I felt like when I watched Killian Hayes, who was somebody I was a little bit lower on in the draft, that it feels a little bit like he has to take those shots to get his shot off, because he can't kind of turn the corner on teams when he's creating. So he's got to kind of go to his step back. And because he's tall, he can get the shots off cleanly, but it's more out of necessity than something that he's using, like, because it's just in his bag. So I think he's a guy that, like, if you swung on him in, the late first round, early second round is where I'd feel a little bit more comfortable. And again, like if he returned top 20 value, it wouldn't shock me because he does have pedigree. He looked good in the FIBA tournament last summer, but there's just other guys available that I would personally rather take a bet on with their potential.
Any other names or thoughts, as far as the Rockets are concerned with this draft? Anybody else that's on your mind, or some angle that we haven't taken yet?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of guys I love in this draft. I think EJ Liddell is a guy that if he's available, I think would be really interesting. And he's not a clean fit with Şengün, but I think that when you look at the success of a guy like Grant Williams, when you look at like prime Paul Millsap, that's kind of the kind of guy that I see him as. And he's a guy that I think could play a little bit of 5 defensively. He could switch out on the perimeter, excellent shot blocker. Like his mom was like a big time volleyball player back in the day. And you see that in like his one step vertical. He was really efficient in pick and pop situations. He's a good roll man, good passer. So I think he's really good value at that part of the draft. As a Bulls fan, I'm hoping that, he's one of the guys that the Bulls end up with. I'm a big fan of his game. I think he's really just a brilliant kid and reads the game so well, watches a ton of film, really gets it, mature. I think that Ousmane Dieng, like there's a world where he's available, and that's an upside play that I think would be really interesting. Like I think he's the guy that if I was going to take the upside play on like the 6'10" wing, who's a little bit raw, it would be him over Jovic.
He's got a lot of fans on Rockets Twitter, trust me.
Yeah, I'm sure. And, like he had a disastrous start to the year, like just absolutely, it looked like he was not going to be in the draft this year. And then it just clicked for him. And he turned it on. He was scoring the ball regularly. He was playing more physical. And some of the passing flashes I'm telling you, are unbelievable for a guy his size, effortless, live dribble, perfectly placed, like just really, really impressive. Him and Jalen Williams are two of the most impressive passers in the entire draft. And maybe that says more about like the point guard options in this draft in particular. But when you look at a guy who's 6'10", who could shoot the ball off the catch, who could create his own shot, who can get to the rim, who's smooth and has that kind of passing acumen, he's really intriguing. He's far away. It's going to be a process for him in the NBA because the physicality is really going to be a lot for him early on, but he's so young. And I think that he's a guy that if you're an analytics person, he's a guy you could miss on because the analytics aren't going to be there and you actually have to watch the film with him. But he's a really intriguing guy. I think he's going to be a lottery guy. Yeah. Ultimately, because I think those tools are going to be so enticing to teams. But if he's there for Houston, I think absolute home run if he's there.
Well, it's great stuff. I can't tell you how excited we are to get a chance to get a couple of guys and get a top 3 guy, because that was the biggest thing for the Rockets, is to stay in that top 3 area. And can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show with us and give us some information. Again, it's the Draftdaq podcast, and I'll let you plug anything else you want to before we take off.
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at Corey Tulaba. I'm posting clips and comments about the draft all day. NoCeilingsNBA.com. That you can find all of the links, like the podcast, the YouTube. I also have a personal YouTube, the NBA Draft Dude, and we just released our draft guide, which is really informative again. And we released a whole bunch of merch, really cool, like draft theme merch, which we're excited about. But Yeah, that's pretty much it. If you go to noceilingsnba.com, you can find myself and the entire crew's all the work that we're doing, and all the work there is free. So if you subscribe, you'll get it directly to your inbox every Monday through Friday.
Loving what you guys are doing over there. Really love listening to you and Albert. You guys are a fun chemistry, fun team. And thanks again for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate it.
Anytime. Appreciate you having me.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Don't forget to follow Houston Sports Talk on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, the Google Podcast app, or the Stitcher app. You can support us by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or by telling your friends about us. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.